What is up, Acinators? Here I am at the DKU Water Pavilion right now, enjoying some beautiful jasmine tea and some beautiful weather. Now, the Water Pavilion on campus here is my favorite place to study, provided the weather is nice. It reminds me of the water features we see in Pakistan. It helps me think better to look at water, and it is just beautiful. Look at that. You see what I'm seeing? And I think arguably it is the most Chinese architecture you can find on campus that you can actually study, in proximity to. And so right now I'm enjoying two sort of modernized aspects of Chinese culture, in a way. Bear with me. You see the water feature here that is similar in many, or that is a sort of principle or a thing to have in many, Chinese architecture. And then I have this jasmine tea. And I use the word modern on purpose because the form in which I'm consuming these is modern, right? This is not how it was back then. And this sort of brings me back to, it reminds me of our field trip we took to the museum. The purpose of a museum is to preserve and respect a culture. And I am currently studying AI ethics in China, where the topic of culture becomes increasingly important as something we need to take into account. And I want to bring up, and in that sort of discourse, we talk about cultural preservation. And I want to apply that here too, where I want to bring up the question of cultural preservation, versus modernization and innovation. Those two seem to be at odds with each other. Culture tells us to, keep what we have and don't really change it. And modernization, innovation is all about change and getting better and increasing or reaching the next step. And I want to ask the question of what that relationship should look like, right? Should we have all these modern buildings everywhere, or should we have all old buildings? And that's just an example. And I would present two arguments for cultural preservation over modernization and innovation. Being an ethics major, I feel like this is pretty fitting. But this isn't far off from, this isn't something you won't be able to understand. These are pretty simple. And I would like, the engagement from my audience, my classmates, that for your comments, you sort of touch on where you stand on this topic of where we should be on that scale. And so I believe we should be more on the cultural preservation side, right? I think that preserving traditional architecture, like Suzhou's gardens, or that, similar sites we see in Beijing are very important. It allows people to sort of connect with their history and cultural identity. And it's important to know where you've been, to know where you come from. And it reflects, and history is important because, well, we've made a lot of mistakes in the past. We've done a lot of great things. And those, without a doubt, inform the future. So if we don't remain in touch with them, we may lose our way, or we may sort of kind of regress in a way. And it's important to learn from history and to appreciate it, good or bad, to acknowledge that it happened and to see what it means for the future. And the second argument for cultural preservation is that, there is money involved there. We do have tourism and economic benefits. Suzhou is definitely benefited from its tourism because of how well it's preserved its culture. People come there because of how well preserved it is, and probably they come there because the other places, like the ones they live at or are from or have seen, are not as well preserved. So there's definitely something to be said as to why it's important to keep culture intact. The richer the history is documented, the better it will be in the long run, in a way, right? And the classic counterargument is like preserving old architecture would hinder progress. It would take up space that could be used by, modern infrastructure or technology and things like that. And yes, while modern infrastructure is essential for development and stuff like that, cultural preservation and innovation can exist. And we've seen that in Suzhou, right? One of the things I mentioned in our class before was talking about how I saw a stark contrast in a way where once we left the walls of the more preserved part, I began to see buildings and a more urban atmosphere. And I think that there is something to be said about that. That it is possible for those two to exist. Now, I will say it was quite a stark difference coming from very traditional architecture to seeing a building very high and made of glass and things like that. I think that it wasn't a smooth transition, but it was one that showed that both are doing just fine together. So I think that it's not one or the other, but it certainly it we certainly need to look at where we should lie on that spectrum. The Suzhou has its charm, its ancient charm, but it has its modern industry, and I think that's really cool. And I have just been thinking about where I stand on this and what it means for our future as we become increasingly more modernized with stuff like AI or building higher and higher buildings or building with other materials and in fear that we will lose sort of the charm and the other sorts of things that made our different histories very unique and very I guess productive for that certain group of people. And I think that we do need to find a sort of balance. The world is changing and we must change with it, but at the same time we do need to stay rooted, and we do need to take that with us wherever we go, because culture is a very important part of us, and it is an extremely and we cannot really move forward, in my opinion, without taking into account what has happened in the past. And so in the comments, let me know what you guys think about this sort of this question of whether we should be more modern or whether we should preserve our culture. And I obviously talked about it particularly with respect to buildings and architecture in Suzhou and things like that, but feel free to let me know what you guys think. I'm also thinking this through, and part of our journal is to just jot down what we're thinking about. I don't have a solution. I don't have a clear answer. I have arguments for one side, but I am more than happy and very willing to understand the other side. So that's my journal, and I will see you later, Acinators, and I will enjoy my tea now.